Hi, everybody. I'm very happy to stay here today to see some friendly faces and also some people that I only know through internet first, and now I meet here personally. And I'd like to ask also, I need to talk actually 15 minutes if everybody agree, because after all, it's 4 years of pilot project. So I believe that with the presence of members of the government and the ruling party is no shortage here are advocates for Bolsa Familia. This makes it much easier for us, saving time and labor, because after recognizing the merits of Bolsa Familia, we immediately can go to what really matters, the proposition of a basic income truly unconditional and enforceable, not only in the micro, where we already operate, but the micro, in this case, national. As we do not intend to deny the merit of anyone, and we want to get right to the point, we have our first word by the recognition and to remain no partisan, that both the scholarship and the Bolsa Familia have for families' social welfare and economics in Brazil. Thus, merit recognized, let us citizens, after all, is the minimum that is expected for us, because however takes the initiative citizen paying a basic income in a country with a government program of national dimensions of Bolsa Familia does not just have to see significant difference between both. After years of experience gained from the pilot project, we must have something more to say. And yes, we have. And this is a really shame that our minister is not here to say that to her. From our point of view, the dilemma of Bolsa Familia is that it cannot stop or continue as it is. Back to the policies of the public who ask for the bread baton, not even deserve mention. What should we do? Sweeten the bitter taste of the welfareist drug? No, thanks. Develop is accurate, but more than output ports, we need, without missing word, is leaving the Bolsa Familia and entering the basic income. How? That's the question. A gradual transition is proposed. That initial analysis seems to be the most sensible. Decrease conditionalities until a given moment they said no longer exist, and behold, no one feel or perceive painless and finally arrive at basic income. In theory, this is an excellent proposal, and this is the problem, in theory. Handles a battle, a struggle of political and economic interests, as if there is likely to be faced with writing only. It is a piece of fiction, or rather bureaucratic. Then we cannot be offended when they accuse us of being advocates of basic income to being mad and utopians. There is no doubt that the pen is stronger than the sword, but we need less people writing and beating, and more people putting their hand in the pocket. In practice, it's a different story, and on the basis, we will make our propositions. If we are wrong, great. The Brazilian government finally begin the transition, and we just ask why it took so long. If not, again, while the buzzer sings, we will work as a work ant. Perhaps this discourse sounds too pragmatic. It's not. Quite the contrary. We speak very clear that the transition from Bolsa Familia to basic income is much more than discussing technical issues or public policy. That is why the discussion of the implementation of basic income cannot be closed in the transition of Bolsa Familia for basic income. Why reduce the issues to mere reduction or increase of conditionalities? Because this will not only lose in terms of proposition, to not do nothing, is especially lose the libertarian and universal principle of basic income. Reduce the basic income as a government program and the unconditionality that demands respect, dignity and human rights to a simple technical question lost the action of the civil society, the most interest in nullify the conditionalities. Truth be told, it's the only growing. This is not strange that the civil society do not base work and put their hand in their pockets to pay solidarity the basic income, as the pilot project in Coatinga Velho. Above all, we must not forget that while we are discussing here, approaching techniques methodologies on paper counterpounds that everything is beautiful and sometimes even well-intentioned, in the real world, people are not numbers, accounts, or votes. In remote communities, the Coatinga Velho, Paranapiacabas, and Otiveiro Omitara's forgotten life, which mailing there any explicit or implicit conditionality will constitute pure power relations. Does not mean that in each of these places reigns accommodation, clientelism, patronage, paternalism, dependence, but it's clear that if this is not the case in the merits of the parties involved, in the personal relationships, and not as a result of the system. As Oscar Wilde said, all authority is degrades those who exercise it as those over whom it is exercised. When used with a certain amount of kindness and accompanied by prizes and rewards, it becomes alarmingly demoralizing. Individuals, in this case, less aware of the horrible pressure they are subjected, so go through life in a kind of rude comfort as domesticated animals, without ever realizing that others are thinking too, living by other people's standing, wearing practically what one might call the clothes of others, without being themselves by a single moment. Who is free, says a astute thinker, not satisfied, and authority to entice people to conform, creates and natures a very crude kind of barbaric. So, worse than the employment trap that closes Bolsa Familia and basic income overcomes, conditionalism brings in its wake a danger even more to democracy and citizenship. Every conditionality implies the suppression of the full exercise of citizenship, and a vein are open to state interference in one's life. And those who think that such interference is valid under certain conditions, it is because we have never seen in such a situation to suffer embarrassment and discrimination. Do not know what is being treated, screening with poor, as a people, or a livestock, or wheelchair. And I'm not speaking here as a researcher. I speak now as a resident of a poor community which not only saw, but I felt in the flesh what it describes. The true authority does not force, but give. Do not create conditionality, create conditions and opportunities. For the authority do not be itself a problem. It is necessary a pedagogical relation and not power. But first, the citizens must have the right in any moment to reject it. But from the authority, this is not enough. The true authority does not wait for the independence. They must work for the emancipation. It's only in your denied and not in your affirmation that the authority legitimate yourself. And just do your work when it becomes new and set free the citizens for your dependence. Education is not this paternalism show of society. Education is the process of social transformation of dependent people incapable, people with real freedom. The authority is only valid for a free education, and the authority who doesn't work in favor of emancipation, it is not educative and citizen, it is counter-pedagogical and authoritarian. The education has your own value and cannot be reduced, or a mere conditionalities counterpoint, especially the citizens' education that is only learned out of classroom. It is learning in the democratic and the social transformation itself. The intention or pretension of the social program must manifest first of all in the social program's methodology itself. The program must be thinking as a pedagogical process of empowerment of the citizens and not of doctrination or control. We must be aware that between Bolsa Familia and basic income are discussing much more than sketches of government programs. We are taking the direction of a true citizenship or citizenship of a paper, which in practice means moving towards a state of direct democracy or less so, civil rights or economic or not so, the end of all forms of discrimination including socioeconomic or not. No euphemism when discussing seriously the replacement of the Bolsa Familia to basic income, should be aware that we are pointing to two opposite directions and contradictory by definition of citizen empowerment and strengthening of the state, the control of the state. And who think the political representatives of government ignores this libertarian character of basic income and underestimate his feeling for power. The difference between Bolsa Familia and basic income apply, at least that has been put into practice so far, is therefore not only a right to a care insurance law, but the approach and especially principles. The basic income is libertarian, is democratic, it's a citizen. Both aims to eradicate poverty, but the poverty basic income not only economic but also political. And so much depends on the methodology with which it is put in practice. It's completely fallacious idea that we should give up our personal freedom if we have some collective security. True freedom and security are guaranteed in the state as the real freedoms. The very uncertain about the deprivation of freedom, terror and fear arising from the constant possibility of the loss of the fundamental conditions of life and livelihood is in itself constitute an act of violence and the poverty. That's why we cannot combat poverty materially, while hunger and poverty are the most severe forms of deprivation and emergency. Sorry. Its eradication cannot be done at the expense of political political freedoms and cultural rights of the citizen. Poverty is not only material, it is the state of economic deprivation of fundamental freedoms and cultural policy, not detached from each other, but integrated into one and the same capital. That is why it is mistaken who thinks that we distribute money in Coatinga Velho. We provide capital in all its forms of capitalized via basic income. We are not playing with words. Without this capital, money is paper without this network of trust and reciprocity. The financial system itself is only a cloud of numbers on the internet. Our commitment to the libertarian spirit and social basic income is so deep conviction that we have in countries with authoritarian regimes to democracy in disguise. And unconditional basic income will be a fake, a basic income in name only. For conditionality in these states, exception of right will be tacit and implicit obedience to the government itself. This extreme case is important to understand that without political freedom or full citizenship to basic income, and generally all income transfer tends to no longer be an instrument of libertarian to become an instrument of control and may even expand the instrument of oppression to the extent that the fear of losing its constructs in instrument maneuver depend benefit of the masses, and that in any regime, even in a democracy, after all, nothing as a strong economic fear or anxiety in times of military or election campaigns. This does not mean that we should adopt the neoliberal posture of live and let die. On the contrary, we must convert the boom in law and adopt the redistribution of the common good based on the new social contract. More than contemporary surveillance state must guarantee real freedom as the basis for a true state of peace, not only in his letter magna, but the systematization of new institutions devoted to the emerging political paradigm that requires the empowerment of the citizen and not the other. In this sense, basic income inspires new indicators for measuring the performance of government social policy mainly. This evaluation involves two basic questions. As the raised back in the fact to the hands of the citizens without giving lost its way, what goes into the hand of those in need? These efficiency rates, both operationally and redistribution, should be compared with the rates of social inequality to determine the efficacy and effectiveness not only of public policy, but the legitimacy of the institution itself. Contemporary states not producing reduction of social inequality have no morality to tax, because the tax that effectively does not reduce social inequality is nothing but institutionalized theft. On this subject, we have an even more sui generis position: advocate a basic income maintained by voluntary contributions, which does not mean defending the ingenuity to survive with any donations, but any form of association or social contract between free and voluntary persons who are not obligated or forced, even if coerced by legal means, to finance a basic income each other. Especially because between traditional philanthropy and taxes, there are other forms of intelligent life possible, other forms of systematized, more efficient economic and legal action are possible and should be experienced by a lab to develop new public policies. And this is what we are currently doing in Recivitas, and this is on the experiments we propose to talk now, because it's very easy to criticize. Create workable proposition from this criticism. This is the real challenge. Our pilot project of Coatinga Velho has been criticized for being ridiculously small, yet it is precisely in their diminutive dimension that lays its greatest strength and potential to design a strategic plan for implementation of the basic income scale, either in Brazil or international. Why not? The need for adaptation gave Coatinga Velho very interesting features. Their model of network community with low operational costs makes it not only extremely cheap, but highly replicable and much easier to become self-sustaining. Its returns unobtrusive but significant in terms of human development and microeconomics make it attractive for social investment, especially for not being inserted into the logic of social assistance programs, but within the solidarity economic and financial associativism. It was the line that we now work shortly after the first results that pointed to the path of microfinance and culminate with the Big Bank, the social bank first presented at Ritsumeikan University at Japan in November 2010. Nowadays, if there is something less well-liked, that governments are the banks. But the creation of a social bank too is important for the three reasons. First, that the idea of a compulsory contribution is a contradiction with the principles of a basic income. Second, it's perfectly possible to eliminate bureaucratic costs when we associate financially through contracts where we assume the commitments of our income contributed and pay equal for all members of this community. And third, it gives financial inclusion as economic right, i.e. the social character that it must have, and the social character the bank owns. The social bank proposal can be put in practice by any community independent of the common good that constitutes herself, as soon as they have the social capital and wish to apply the principles of equitative contributions and equal redistribution. Supposing wish and social capital, we could, for example, make from being the principle of this community and make a mutual security network through this Congress. But this mutual security network wouldn't have sense. After all, for the universal spirit of basic income, better will be construct this network through the mutuality borders as a foundation designated to finance a basic income experience all over the world. All of you, especially the institution, government, as Brazilians, could make some contributions. If there is no conditionality into what they put to socialize the loss in banks during the financial crisis. Actually, they are too big to broke, and society even bigger. And they are putting a bank router in the world. But this is obviously utopic. Even finance freedom and liberty and international territory is always easier than your own. Sorry for the representatives here. I also represent a juridical person. A solidarity network is not a job for a juridical person with a fake personality, but with a natural person with real character. That is why I want back for the small word, but real and replicable, for what we are doing to multiply the real experience with basic income, like in Coatinga Velho worldwide. However, for the sake of bureaucracy, we gave priority to the development of the investment fund of basic income guarantee. This is a simple idea. The income from this investment rate then begin pocketed by executives go to the payment of basic income pilot projects such as Coatinga Velho. The fund is currently in phase of fundraising and already has more than R$500,000 reais in signed commitments deposits. And as the fund is officially constituted, which will require a little more bureaucracy and resource, will already be a more than enough capital to sustain Coatinga Velho and other communities. That is why today we are announcing with great happiness that in January 2013, we will open officially the call for funding of new communities of basic income for NGOs and municipalities. And we invite everybody here to take part of the foundation of this Solidarity Network Borderless to join us. Some people think that this is not a basic income, that a basic income can only be paid by government. We are running the original conception of the idea. Quite the contrary, as Thomas Paine says, much of that order arraying in mankind is not the effect of government. It has its origin in the principle of society and the natural constitution of man, the mutual dependence and reciprocal interest of every man to respect other, and that all part of a civilized community has some relationship to the other, creates a great thread that holds it together. It is the great and fundamental principle of society and civilization. The common usage universally consented to and mutually and reciprocally maintained the incessant flow of interest passing through a million channels, strengthens the total mass of civilized man, is all these things infinitely more than to anything that can make even the best instituted governments, which depend the security and prosperity of the individual and the whole. With regards to all these matters, man is a creature more consistent than he knows and than government would wish him to believe. The spirit of a basic income has always been libertarian and walked toward universalization. Basic income closes a freedom and equality so real that even the nationality should lose their tacit condition for unconditional communion between people voluntary, willing to guarantee this right universally, without intermediaries or impediments in a borderless of a solidarity network. That's why the basic income should be an international initiative, because human rights and freedom of the magnitude of basic income cannot know borders or discrimination between peoples and territory, especially because if there is something we learn not with the project, but with the invisible and silent struggle that kept a community standing virtually alone for 4 years, is that the basic income will never be given, for a very simple reason. It is not a blessing, it's a law, and fundamental rights and freedoms historically is not granted, but acquired. And what does this have to do with the specific proposal for the transition from Bolsa Família to basic income? Everything. There is no transition. There are two separate programs on purpose and principles. The best strategy to stimulate with tax incentives for investors or even allocation of resources for this investment fund for the third sector to delivering in basic income communities is strategically prioritizing the poorest location according to the maps of poverty, which the government has anyway. NGOs have the reach. Since the basic income resource is funded directly by private enterprise and the government's Bolsa Família, the two would act in a cooperative manner. The output of the Bolsa Família would then be natural, with its own exit from the poverty line, the first condition for it to start receiving the benefit. The Bolsa Família does not cease until it's no longer and falls naturally into obsolescence if or when the basic income will performs its intended effect. We partly not only bet, but work for this moment. And we can say that this process of supplanting the natural basic income on the Bolsa Família will occur, mainly because basic income is not a program, but the foundation of a new economy. Soon we will publish the data on a new experience that will complete 2 years with a new type of microcredit factored in basic income, and by the special characteristics of profitability and reliability that gives basic income can recapitalize themselves without interest. Another teeny small revolution with the revolution basic income applied, and that this strengthens our proposal. The basic income is just the beginning. 4 years ago, we are just 2 persons. Today, we are a small movement, open to everybody who wants to take part of it, being as a volunteer, as a social investor, getting together with the pioneers who are opening this investment fund. This is basically our proposition to the Brazilian government representatives. We will respectfully wait for the answer, but working out in the meantime. Like a wise Brazilian singer once said, "Come on, let's go, because waiting is not knowing. Who knows, make it happen. Doesn't wait it for it to happen." Thank you very much.